Alright, so here is the demo for the first tile that we're making in ceramics class. This is tile number 1, the imprinted texture tile. So here's a few examples of what our project will look like when it's done. You will choose a design and choose different objects to imprint your tile with. These three have been fired already, so this is kind of the color that it will look when it's done. This one has not been fired yet. This one is bone dry. So it's completely dry. All of the water is out of it, but it has not been fired or stained yet. So that's why this one looks a little bit different than these three. But I'm going to show you guys how to make just the first part of the tile, so just the basic tile with no pattern on it, and then the next video will show you guys how to apply the pattern with that imprinted design. So the first things you guys are going to need is you're going to need a board, one of these boards from the supply table. You're going to want to make sure you're working on a board so that when we're rolling out our clay it does not stick to the table, and so that we have something sturdy to work on for the first part of our project. So once you get your clay out of the bag, you're going to want to use fresh clay. Start kind of smacking it down just with your hand to begin to stretch it out. And then we are going to grab our rolling pins and our 3/4 inch dowels. So you want to make sure you're using the 3/4 inch dowels. We also have 1/2 inch dowels in class, but we're going to be using 3/4 inch ones. They're a little bit thicker. If we go too thin on our tile, it will end up being too weak and fragile and might end up cracking or breaking. So we're going to use our 3/4 inch dowels. Both of those are going to go on the side of your clay. You want to make sure that they're not so far out that your rolling pin will not hit them, because we're using these dowels to help us get the correct and even thickness all the way through our tile. So I'm actually going to switch to one of the bigger rollers so that I have a little bit more room and space and I can spread these out a little bit further. So what you're going to do is you're going to start rolling out your clay. And we're stretching the clay when we're doing this. You're going to want to flip it and turn it, because we want to stretch the clay out in all different directions. Keep stretching out the clay. You can see my clay is cracking a little bit on the edges. That's okay. The only reason it's doing that is just because this clay is a little bit drier. It's not fresh out of the bag. This is clay that was recycled and wedged out again. But if you do start to see your clay to crack on the edges, that's completely fine. It's normal for clay that has been sitting out for a little bit. Don't worry about that, because we're going to end up cutting off these anyways. So I'm going to keep flipping, keep turning, and rolling this out, and I'm making sure that my dowels aren't getting out too far. They're still staying in the same spot, and I know that this is done being rolled out when I press the roller over the clay slab and I see that it's not stretching anymore. So you can see that this is not stretching anymore, so I'm going to take my dowels away, put those back, and my rolling pin can go back as well. And now what I'm going to do is we're going to cut out our square. So we have square templates that you can use. You're going to put it right in the center or wherever it fits best. These paper templates are nice because they kind of stick to the clay. Press it down a little bit, but not so hard that you make an indent in the clay. And then you are going to take your needle tool and you're going to very lightly trace. You're not cutting yet. You're going to trace around your square. Make sure your square doesn't move. And make sure the needle tool is running along the edge of that square so that we get a nice, clean tracing of that square. Just like that. So now, we trace that first. You're always going to trace or measure first and then cut. You never want to trace and cut at the same time, because we want to make sure that if we make any mistakes, we can always go back. So trace first, then cut. So we're not going to cut using our paper template as a guide, because they're made out of paper, they can get warped and bent, and so we want to make sure that our tile is a perfect square. So we are going to use the right angle rulers that we have in class. Make sure it has a nice pointy sharp edge. Some of them are broken, so make sure you get one with a nice clean pointy sharp edge. And what you're going to do is line that up with the lines that you just drew, and you're going to cut. I always do 2 cuts with your needle tool. Put that aside. You want to make sure when you're cutting with your needle tool that you're cutting straight up and down like this, and not cutting at an angle like that, so that we get nice straight edges across, just like that. If we cut at an angle, we're going to start to get a beveled edge, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to cut the other side. Again, make sure that you're holding down your ruler, but you're not pressing so hard that you make an indent into your clay. After you cut the first 2 edges, you're not going to flip and go directly to the other opposite corner. You want to make sure that you just turn this so that you're lining up one of the edges with the ruler with an edge that you just cut, and the other edge with one of your lines that you traced. And this is going to make it so that it's a perfect square all the way across. Cut through that. Put my clay to the side, and one more time, edge of that ruler and cutting straight across, being sure to hold my ruler or my needle tool perfectly straight up and down. And then you should have your square, just like this. So the edges, you might notice, might get a little messed up. That's okay. When we go back and paddle those, we'll be able to fix them. If you want to, you can kind of go in and you can press and fix them a little bit too, because I know I like to do that sometimes. But we are going to be imprinting a design on this, so your tile is going to warp a little bit, but that's something that we can fix towards the end once we're done imprinting all of our patterns. So what you're going to do next, this is technically, the side that's up right now is going to be the bottom. So on the bottom of our tile, we are going to need to make some score lines. And so score lines, like you can see on the bottom of all of these, allow for air to get underneath our tile when it's drying, because eventually we'll flip this over. The score lines will allow air to pass through the bottom of our tile so that our tile is drying evenly on the top and on the bottom. So that's why we make those score lines. So in our class, we're going to do them with pencil. And you want to do about 5 score lines going in each direction. So the best way to do this, I like to use a ruler. So I'm just going to use my right angle again. And I'm going to start with a cross or an X that goes just from corner to corner. And the reason we're using a pencil and not a needle tool is because the needle tool is a little too sharp, and it's really difficult to get a shallow cut with a needle tool. And the needle tool tends to rip the clay. Pencils aren't as sharp as needle tools, and they don't tend to rip the clay, they just kind of make an indentation in the clay. And it's a little bit easier to go shallow. So you only want to go about 1/8 of an inch deep. So really, really, really shallow, just enough so that the air can pass through. So you start with that X, and then you're going to, on the opposite of each line, you're going to do 2 extra lines, and then 2 going this way. So I'll show that right now. So they don't have to be perfectly evenly spaced. You don't have to measure them. Just spaced out enough so that they go evenly across the surface of your tile. Make sure you are going from one edge all the way to the other edge. Don't stop short, or else the air will not be able to pass through. And this is extremely important, because if we don't allow air to pass through the bottom of our project by using these score lines, then our tile will dry quicker on the top and slower on the bottom, which will cause the edges to warp. So instead of your tile being able to lay flat and nice like this, the edges will start to curl up because the top part is shrinking, the clay is shrinking, and pulling the top layer in, and your edges on the outside start to come up because of that. So we really want to make sure that these score lines are in there. So your project should look something like that. Remember, it's good to always go a little bit more shallow than you think you would, than rather to go too deep, because you can always go back in and go over those lines again. If you go too deep, it makes the clay weaker, and it's also, we can't go backwards from there. You'll have to start over if it's way too deep and there's no saving it. So make sure that you're going more shallow than you think you need to. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to write our initials or our name. So I will put Miss E. And you're going to do this again with a pencil. I'm doing this upside down, so I hope it's correct. Miss E. So first and last name, or first name and last initial, just anything so that you know it's yours and it's identifiable to you. And then you're going to put your period number. For our class, we put E for Erickson. And then you put your period number. So I'm going to put E5. And it may look a little bit messy, and that's okay. This is just the bottom, so no one's going to see that. And then what you're going to do from there is you are going to grab a paper towel. About 1.5 feet long enough so that you can fold it a few times, but it's still bigger than your tile. And we are going to transfer our tile to the paper towel. So we're going to flip it over and have it on the paper towel. The reason for this is because we do not need our tile to be on this huge board. It does not fit in your cubbies, and we don't have enough of these boards in class for everyone to have their own, so we want to make sure we're sharing them. So once you're done with scoring the back of your tile and writing your initials, you're going to very carefully, I'm going to scoop this over here, very carefully lift your tile. Make sure you're using light pressure. I'm kind of going to loosen the edges first. Very carefully lift your tile, and you're going to turn it over and put it on your paper towel. Now you can give this board to someone else in class that needs it. If no one needs it at your table or no one needs it in class, go ahead and put it away, back where they're supposed to go. And now you can move around your tile using the paper towel, and you won't have to worry about touching the edges and making those messed up or anything. So that is the first step of how you make your tile.